I don't know how many of you would have watched the World Juniors after Canada bowed out, lost to Czechia. There I go. I get it again. Czechia. Why do I add the N?
What did you say?
No need to add an N. That it's all this bowling and concession and wonton soup talk. Flustered for the next 3 hours. But anyway, if you watched it, that game yesterday, I didn't get a chance to actually watch the highlights. Kid was playing, like I said, in Mormon. NFL games galore, everything. Americans pull it out again. Gold medal around their neck. Many thought Finland, the way the game was going, was going to walk away with it, but the U.S. does it. So I'm sitting last night and sitting this morning thinking, I'm like, I would really like to talk about the United States National Team Development Program when it comes to hockey. And I know we talk about it a lot up here, and sometimes we talk about things that we shouldn't. Like we know, but we don't. I was texting some of my buddies that I played with down in the States. I'm like, what do you guys know about it? They didn't know much about it either. All I know is there's one Saskatchewan boy at this thing now, Dean Boyker's boy from like Watson, Saskatchewan. He went from the Saskatoon Blazers to the U.S. National Development Team this year, which I don't think we'll ever see again. I know. I'm watching your face on the stream too, Bidsy. It's crazy. Yeah. So I said, let's reach out to Greg Wyshynski from ESPN, who seems to know a lot about hockey and definitely American hockey. And Greg says this morning, yep, I'll come on. No problem. Love Sasky. Love the weather up there. Love the people. Greg, thanks so much for hopping on the Sports Cage again.
And I, too, love talking about the dominance of American hockey globally. That's also a shared trait between you and I. Listen, obviously, like back-to-back World Juniors, they've won now 3 out of 5 years. It's a real good run for this program, and so happy to talk about it. And we'll not do it at the expense of my friends in Canada. How about that?
Yeah, you know what? I started reading. It started in 1996, so that is a while ago now. And how do you explain to people, Greg, that probably aren't as educated as people in and around the Michigan area, definitely, or in the hockey scope down in the States? How do you explain what this program is and why it's been so successful?
Well, it's not just the program, which obviously does a really good job of identifying young athletes that are playing hockey. I mean, you know, the one of the mantras of USA Hockey is basically the moment that you put your skates on the ice for the first time, they're going to hopefully have you within some level of their program to foster that love and to foster that talent to the point where then all of a sudden you're 17, 18 years old and playing in a development program. But I mean, it's also kind of the development of this pipeline at the same time that all of the stuff that we saw, and it's not a coincidence, you said, you know, the mid-'90s, all the stuff that we've saw about expanding the NHL's footprint in America into quote-unquote non-traditional markets, the growth of the game, the growth of great American-born talents. I think the entire generation of young offensive players that we see now, from Matthew Tkachuk to Jack Hughes, owes a debt to Patrick Kane. All of this stuff has happened over the last couple decades, and it's allowed the USA Hockey to fill this pipeline with really talented young players from a larger swath of the country than, like you indicated before, just hitting Massachusetts, Minnesota, and Michigan over and over again like they had been for decades.
Bidsy's mic's not on, guys.
Oh, okay.
There we go.
They got me on now? Okay, yeah. They bumped me up. Greg, Derek Bidwell here in Saskatoon. Now, first off, couldn't you have left us, you Americans, couldn't you have left us the World Juniors? Couldn't you have just left us that? Now you're taking that over. But you know, obviously there's been some success, like you said, in the last few years with the American program. Does this all go way back to when Wayne Gretzky, went to LA and his influence on American hockey and the trickle-down effect has us where we are right now? I
mean, there's a certain amount of that. I mean, obviously, like the success of hockey in California then begot the success of hockey in Florida, and then all of a sudden you've got a team in Nashville. And, there was sort of that trickle-down effect of Gretzky going to play for the Kings. That certainly, I think, sparked some of the expansion that we saw in the 1990s and into the 2000s. But ultimately, you have to also give both USA Hockey and the NHL credit, because it's not simply just like there's a team in my neighborhood now and I'm going to go play hockey. It's also creating opportunity for these young athletes to play hockey. I was going back and forth with a Canadian before on social media. I know that's a rarity for me, and they were talking about the population of the United States versus the population of Canada, and only now is the U.S. turning the corner. And honestly, part of that is trying to get our best and brightest athletes to try out hockey versus try out basketball or football or baseball. But it's also climate. I mean, you have to create an infrastructure for hockey to thrive and create opportunities for, athletes to play at a somewhat elite level in a lot of places in this country that don't really have ice, right? So it's a lot of that infrastructure that's grown over the last 20 to 25 years. And all of it has sort of pointed to a greater number of our talented young athletes choosing to pick up a stick and try their hand at hockey and then falling in love with the sport.
So the program itself in Michigan, and it's really groomed for the ages, the way I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong. So the World Junior team, a lot of these kids, if not all of them, would have been in this program the last 3 years. Now they're off playing either Major Junior or they're playing NCAA. So they kind of grab this program and they have an under 17 and under 18 team in Michigan where they get billeted out, they live, they're together, they play together. I don't think they're in a league anymore. Correct me if I'm wrong. How do you talk about that program and what makes that work in Michigan?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And so, the competition is kind of from within, amongst the elite players that are there. And, I think it's no different than when an NHL team wants to have its minor league team as close as possible geographically, right? You want all those players together. You want to be able to have your eyes on them at all times. And I think the centralization of the national team program in Michigan has really helped, them foster these young players and really kind of, make the training intensive and also make the training uniform. So it's not, a kid playing in California who's not necessarily getting the same sort of guidance and coaching as they would if they were just in the national development program. But then, like you said, the next step for most of these kids, it seems, is NCAA hockey, which, again, over the last 20 to 25 years has certainly grown in prominence. It's grown in competitiveness. And if you look at the roster of the World Junior team that just won for the U.S., I mean, you're seeing just a ton of kids that play in the NCAA, whether it's, Ryan Leonard from BC or Z Bouillem from Denver and so on and so forth. So it's really kind of come together where you have this pipeline on the development team program feeding into the NCAA. And then, we'll see what happens to the NCAA with this new rule that makes the major junior kids eligible. I don't think anybody really knows how it's going to shake out. But for now, it's been a pretty reliable pipeline for the Americans.
Yeah, that will be interesting, Greg, to see how that part affects, of course, moving forward, the players playing in different American systems. So is this a system where these young players apply to be a part of, or are they going out and almost scouting to see who they want to be a part of it, or is it a little bit of both?
From what I understand, it's an invitation-based thing, and don't quote me on that. I know I'm saying it on a major media platform, and don't quote me on that. It's kind of silly to say, but I haven't necessarily done the granular work to figure out the application process. But from what I gather, from what I remember in my coverage of the development program over the years, it is one of those deals where, they're identifying young players and they're inviting them to be part of the program. And then obviously over time, there's a weeding out process and all that stuff. They just kind of identify the best and brightest and go from there. But it's one of the best things about the growth of USA Hockey is that that ability to kind of like go out to the relationships they have obviously with the programs around the country. They know who to identify at a young age and keep an eye on. But it's also just their ability to now go throughout the United States into all these little pockets to find these really talented players that, in a different era and in a different growth size for USA Hockey might not have been identified otherwise.
Greg Wyshynski joining us from ESPN here on the SportsCage. You called us a major media platform here. We did start the show by talking about wonton soup and noodle bowls at hockey rink concessions. So thanks for that. I want to talk a little bit, and I read this story on David Carl, who was coaching the World Junior team again to a gold medal, and his story is actually very interesting as he had to retire. I think it was back in 2008, before the NHL entry draft, and he was going to be a high pick because of a heart issue, an enlargement of the heart muscle. Then he goes into coaching, and that was one thing that I was reading a lot on social media as the tournament went on, and everyone was pointing the finger at the Canadian coaching staff and management staff and yada, 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 just because that's what we do. And then everyone was talking about who's this young guy behind the bench of the U.S. team, and it seems like they, relate to him, and he just seems, and we don't know the inner workings. But Greg, how much do you know, and how cool is the story of David Carl?
Yeah, it's an amazing story, like you said. I mean, just that awesome second chapter for a player that for whatever reason, and in this case it was health, couldn't make it to the show. I mean, to have this level of success in your second chapter of hockey life is amazing. I will, by the way, put the blame on coaching and management in Canada. It was a disaster on both fronts, and I could see why they're casting a jealous eye at the Americans. But Carl was there for all three of these wins. He's won national championships with Denver. Yeah. I've covered him at the Frozen Four and as a national team coach, and he's a really remarkable guy. He's got an amazing comportment. He's got a real connection with these young players. He has been contacted by NHL teams. The New Jersey Devils reached out to him last year before hiring Sheldon Keefe as their head coach to maybe just pick his brain, maybe just gauge his interest, but definitely reached out to him as part of the process. And that's going to happen more and more. I mean, he's had an amazing amount of success. And when you have that, there's a very good chance that he might be able to skip the usual, coaching tree, if you will, of, you're a college coach, then you're an assistant coach in the NHL, and you become a head coach. It wouldn't shock me to see him coaching in the league. But the other part about it too, though, with Carl is that he's made it kind of clear that he's extremely happy where he is right now, and that's not a lie. Like, he's extremely happy being a successful college coach. He loves college hockey. He's got a really good landing spot in Denver. I think he likes being a national team coach. I think he's going to wait for his opportunity. Now, for me personally, I've always thought that opportunity, based on the fact that he likes to live in Denver, is to eventually succeed Jared Bednar with the Colorado Avalanche. I don't know if that'll come to fruition, but I wouldn't be shocked if all the noise he's made about trying to stay in the area for the benefit of his family eventually manifests itself as maybe becoming an NHL coach in Colorado.
Bednar, good Sasky boy right there in Colorado. Bidsy, go ahead.
I was just going to ask you, Greg, to expand a little on what you said about the Canadian coaching staff and how you felt that they maybe should get a little bit of this spotlight of blame, if you will, of Canada being ousted again in the quarterfinal.
Well, it's just the practice thing was nonsensical. I feel like from a tactical standpoint, the coaching was misguided, but I also think that it fed into what the management did insofar as trying to build the team for, a tournament played 10 years ago versus a tournament played now. It's one of the more interesting things about like the national team building for both the Canadians and the Americans in the Four Nations tournament and then coming up in the Olympics is the idea of, what does your bottom six really have to look like in a short tournament? Like, do we need to keep building teams in a more traditional way where you're looking at role players, or can we kind of rethink it? the Americans used to do this thing where they would go and try to grab guys that could like win a face-off for, basically an all-star tournament. And now they finally wised up. And if you look at the Four Nations tournament roster, it's guys like, Chris Kreider and Brock Nelson and others that can score 30 goals, but also do the thing that you need them to do down the lineup. So again, I wasn't enamored with the way that Canada was built. I certainly wasn't enamored with the way they were coached. And I, with due respect to the usual, excuse mechanisms of the guys that aren't playing here, that are in the NHL, and all that other stuff, the pressure on these kids, all that other stuff. Like, I just thought, the criticisms that were levied at the way this team was put together were extremely warranted.
It's funny because we got a text message in on the Capital Ford Lincoln text line. One of the text message was the way that Canadians that were wired a lot of times. I don't say we, because I don't put myself in that boat where it's like, well, we could have had 2 teams at this thing. It's like, yeah, you know what though? No one cares. And that's not how it works. I said, you don't need 2,000 kids that are good at hockey anymore at that age. You need 30. Look at Latvia, right? You just need a small group. The other thing, Greg, and I don't know what your take is on this as an American, but I also feel, and I said this to my buddies from down there that we were chatting together, and I said, we can't scare anybody anymore. You can't intimidate teams by running them through the boards. Like, that hockey is gone. The game has changed so much. Like, if you hit anyone, you're getting a hit to the head or you're getting a major penalty. So that is the problem, because at this tournament, we would watch Canada just Dion Phaneuf and Jordan Tutu and run around and hammer everybody. Those days are long gone.
Yeah, and you also have teams like Czechia that can also take a punch. Like they're giving it as much as they're getting it now these days too. And the intimidation goes beyond the physicality. I mean, there also was that air of superiority that surrounded every Canadian team. And obviously in World Juniors, I don't think it's necessarily there anymore. I don't think the minute they step on the ice, the other team is cowering anymore. I think those days are done, especially with the way that other nations have caught up to Canada. I'm interested to see exactly what happens in the international play between the U.S. and Canada at Four Nations and the Olympics, because I do think in the past, when the Canadians step on the ice and it's, you see the uniform and you see Sidney Crosby and you say to yourself, how are we going to beat this team? There was certainly a lot of that, I think, for the U.S.-Canada rivalry in the past and probably for other teams as well. And now that the Americans have at least some of the offensive weaponry that you need to really hang with a power like Canada, be it the Tkachuk brothers or the Hughes brothers or Austin Matthews and Jack Eichel, like, it is going to be interesting to see exactly how sturdy the American spine is, let's say, when they step on the ice and look across and it's Sid and McDavid and all that. Like, I think other versions of this team would have completely just turned to jelly. And I do wonder if the Americans kind of have more of a stiff upper lip about their chances in a game against Canada, because they finally have this generation of players that can maybe stand toe-to-toe with what Canada puts out there.
It's funny you mentioned that, because on the bus ride from Kindersley to Saskatoon with a Bantam hockey team, we watched the 2010 golden game between Americans, and that was such an intense hockey game, and the Americans were not backing down when they came down in that one. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting what happens in the Four Nations and of course in Italy, and I'm sure we'll be able to chat with you as that gets closer. Are you going to be in Montreal for game 1 by chance of the Four Nations?
I actually just sent out a couple weeks ago that I'm not. We have a large staff here at ESPN, so a couple of other reporters will be covering that, but I'm going to cover all the games in Boston, which hopefully ends with the U.S. and Canada getting around too for the championship this time. But I'll be watching. My colleague Arda Okal and I have a live post-game show after the USA-Canada game that we'll be hosting. So It's going to be great, man. I really hope it's going to. I mean, I tend to believe, and I've been saying this for weeks, that when we talk about the casual sports fan in the U.S., and what resonates with them with regard to hockey, there's like 3 things. It's like the Stanley Cup, Wayne Gretzky, and USA-Canada rivalry. And so my hope is that when they do meet at Bell Center and the hype is there, that it's going to become a real moment here in the States to have people tune in to watch a game that has been several years in the making, as all these young guys have come into the league and we haven't had the Olympics and all this other stuff. I really can't wait for the game. I think it's going to be fantastic.
I think it is too. I think it's going to be awesome. Greg, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for making some time today. And then I think I'm going to reach out. We'll have to catch up right before the Four Nations and chat about that a bit.
Yeah, for sure. Anytime. Thanks for having me.
Right on. From ESPN, senior writer Greg Wyshynski joining us here. It is the all-new Sports Cage. We are streaming. You can watch it at sportscage.com. Thanks to everyone who's subscribed. Got us well over 1,000 now. We're tracking to 2,000. Someone's getting a noodle bowl when we hit 2,000. and we're always on 620 CKRM.